Jā, es aicinu pētnieci Aniju Platovu no Kalifornijas Universitātes Santa Barbarā pastāstīt mums par Apollo programmas karogiem. I would like to introduce our key speaker, Dr. Annie Platov from University of California, Santa Barbara, to tell us about flags of the Apollo program. Please.
Let me get my screen going here. Let's see. Are you seeing the slide now? Hello? Not the slide yet. So I apologize. Let's try that again. How about now? Are you seeing the slide? No? I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. Oh, you got this. You have the slide now. Okay. Hello, everyone. I apologize that I do not speak Latvian, but hopefully you will be able to understand the presentation. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak to you today about the flags of the Apollo program. The first flag that I would like to share is this flag for the Apollo program. It was flown outside of the main building at the Manned Spacecraft Center, which is now called Johnson Space Center, in Houston, Texas, during the time that each Apollo crew was in space. It was a simple blue swallowtail flag with the Apollo program emblem on it. These photos of Apollo 11 astronauts, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin, showed the two places where flag patches were sewn onto Apollo's spacesuits. NASA's use of flag patches on spacesuits began with the Gemini 4 mission in 1965. I'm sorry? Oh, the first slide. Okay, I'm not sure how to fix that. You're on the one with the flag, with the astronaut in the flag. Try it again. Okay, let's try that again. I apologize. It's difficult. I can't see what you're seeing on your end. Okay, so let's try this again.
Nav viegli tās lietas sapazēt.
Oh, this is difficult. Okay. I apologize. We practiced and I'm not sure why. That's what I tried. That's what I tried. Yes. It doesn't seem to be working. How is that? Okay. Okay, so I'll just start over then. Let me advance one and see, did it advance? Are you seeing the second slide? Okay. Okay. So we'll just start over again. Are we ready? Okay. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak to you today about the use of flags in the Apollo program. I apologize that I do not speak Latvian, but hopefully you will be able to understand the presentation in English. The first flag that I would like to share is this flag for the Apollo program. It was flown outside of the main building at the Manned Spacecraft Center, which is now called the Johnson Space Center, in Houston, Texas, during the time that each Apollo crew was in space. It was a simple blue swallowtail flag with the Apollo program emblem on it. These photos of Apollo 11 astronauts, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin, show the two places where flag patches were sewn onto the Apollo spacesuits. NASA's use of flag patches on spacesuits began with the Gemini 4 mission in 1965 and continues to this day. The astronauts wore these flag patches on their left sleeves of their spacesuits, and there was also a flag on the back of their life support backpacks. The flags were made of a special fireproof material called beta cloth. Flags are often used on spacecraft to identify the country of origin. For the US space program, this tradition began with the third piloted Mercury capsule in 1962. Since then, NASA has marked all of its human spacecraft with the American flag and either the words United States or the abbreviation USA. During the Apollo program, the markings appeared on the Saturn V rocket, shown at left, the Apollo command module you see in the center, and the command service module shown on the right. On the massive Saturn V rockets, there were actually 4 American flag decals. Each of them was 6 feet wide by 12 feet in length, so a little under 2 meters wide by just under 4 meters in length. The descent stage of the lunar module, that's the vehicle that carried the astronauts down to the surface, also bore a United States flag and the words United States underneath on the descent stage. This is the gold part of the spacecraft at the left. When the astronauts blasted from the surface, they were in the ascent stage, which is the silver-colored portion at top. This means that the flag markings were on the part of the lander that was permanently left on the moon. On later Apollo missions, the astronauts used special moon buggies called lunar roving vehicles. These lunar rovers had the United States flag on their front and rear fenders. As planning for the first Apollo moon landing progressed, it was decided that the astronauts should place an American flag on the lunar surface. This would require a special flagpole as there is no wind on the moon to blow a flag. To compensate, it was necessary to put a horizontal crossbar at the top of the flag so that it would appear to be flying as it would on Earth. Above are two preliminary sketches that were considered by NASA. The flagpole at left would have included small flags of other nations underneath a larger American flag. In the end, though, they decided to place just the United States flag. The next step was to create a set of engineering drawings for the flagpole. Drawings such as this were made for every item built for the Apollo missions. They include exactly how an item was supposed to be manufactured down to every little detail. If you look at the top of the drawing, you can see that a sleeve was sewn across the top of a cloth flag. They started with a regular United States flag, just like any citizen could have bought in a shop. Next, a horizontal crossbar was attached to the pole and threaded through the sleeve. This special flagpole was called the Lunar Flag Assembly. Nothing was easy in the Apollo program. To unpack the lunar flag assembly, to pack the lunar flag assembly for a flight required up to 5 people following a 12-step written procedure. Everything had to be exactly right because the astronauts had limited time on the lunar surface and were wearing pressurized spacesuits when they deployed the flag. They would not have been able to fix the flag if it did not deploy correctly. This NASA engineer is demonstrating some of the steps that the astronauts had to take to deploy the flag. On the first 2 Apollo flights, the flag assemblies were mounted on the ladder of the lunar modules. In this location, they were exposed to the heat from the descent engines. For this reason, they were packed in a protective shroud and insulation packet that had to be removed to access the flag. On later missions, the flags were stored in a different location on the spacecraft, so the shroud was no longer needed. The lunar flag assembly was comprised of 2 separate pieces. The fabric flag was attached to the upper pole with the horizontal crossbar going through the sleeve and with a loop that went around the pole at the bottom of the flag. The second piece of the flagpole was the lower section. It was designed to be driven into the lunar surface by an astronaut using a geological sampling hammer. Deploying the flag required both astronauts. One astronaut took the top portion of the pole and extended the telescoping crossbar. He then raised the bar up relative to the pole until a catch locked and held it in place. The other astronaut sit around so that the pole could stand on its own. They then inserted the top portion of the flagpole into the lower section. The first US flag was placed on the lunar surface during the Apollo 11 moon landing in July 1969. You will notice that I have 2 dates on the slide. While it was July 20th in the United States, the missions operated on Greenwich Mean Time, which is the time used in the United Kingdom. So the flag was placed on the moon at about 15 minutes before 4:00 a.m. in the morning UK time on July 21st. At left, you see Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin as they set up the flag. This image is a still frame from their video camera. The image at right is a photograph taken by Neil Armstrong of Buzz Aldrin with the flag. The press kit for Apollo 11 stated that the planting of the flag is symbolic of the first time man has landed on another celestial body, and does not constitute a territorial claim by the United States. In fact, the United Nations Outer Space Treaty forbids such a claim. To further stress that no territorial claim was being made, a plaque on the ladder of the lunar module read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon." It concluded with the phrase, "We came in peace for all mankind." Throughout the Apollo program, there were 6 missions where astronauts successfully landed on the moon. Each 2-person crew set up a US flag at their landing site. However, these flags were not all the same. The flags for Apollo 11 and 12 were 3 feet by 5 feet in size. Those for Apollo 13 through 16 used flags that were smaller, measuring 2.5 feet by 4 feet. The flag for Apollo 17 was a special flag because it had been displayed in the Mission Control Center in Houston during the other Apollo flights. Well, I could not find anything that documented the size of the flag. Photographic analysis has led me to conclude that it was 3.5 feet by 6.65 feet in size. This is a very special flag size called a G-spec flag because it follows government specifications. G-spec flags are used by the US military and by US government agencies. People often ask what happened to the flags. After all, it has been 50 years since they were placed on the lunar surface. Some have speculated that the flags have by now faded to shades of white, as sometimes happens to flags over time on Earth. However, I am not sure if that's how it would work on the lunar environment. We don't have much information about how the chemistry of nylon works in the vacuum of space, but we do have a small scientific clue from Apollo 12. For example, the Apollo 12 crew retrieved a small white nylon tie from the American unmanned Surveyor 3 spacecraft. They brought that nylon tie back to Earth to be studied. It had been on the moon for just 942 days, but the color of the nylon had changed from white to tan due to prolonged radiation exposure on the lunar surface. So over 50 years of time, it's quite possible that the flag colors have changed to shades of tan and brown due to radiation darkening. The flags could also have been hit by micrometeorites, which would have probably caused damage to the material. While we don't know the condition of the cloth flags, photographs of the landing sites taken from orbit about 10 years ago showed that at least 5 of the flagpoles are still standing. Locations of the flags are marked in these photos of the Apollo 16 and Apollo 17 landing sites. It is believed that the flag for Apollo 11 fell over as the astronauts took off on their return trip home. It was placed very close to their spacecraft, so this was very likely. The only way that we will know for sure is for someone to go back and check on the flag. There were numerous other flags carried on each of the Apollo missions to the moon. Small flags were packed in the official flight kits, or OFKs, in which NASA packed items that were flown to be used as official presentation items. Each astronaut also had their own souvenir pouch, like the one it left, called a Personal Preference Kit, or PPK. These PPKs often included small flags that the astronauts could later give as personal gifts. Nearly all flags that were flown as souvenirs were 4 inches by 6 inches in size. On the Apollo 11 flight, The official flight kit included a flag for each US state and territory, plus a flag for each member state of the United Nations. Now, that's what the press release said. But actually, there were 2 members of the United Nations that were not included in the flag kit. And that was the flag of the Ukrainian SSR and the flag of the Belarusian SSR, because since they flew a flag of the Soviet Union, they didn't include those 2 flags. That was later corrected on the Apollo 16 flag. Anyway, once these flags were returned to Earth, the flags from Apollo 11, they were attached to a special display stand before they were given out as presentation items. They also included a small sample of lunar dust in a clear plastic orb up at the top of the plaque. Well, again, these presentation items were then later given to governors of the states or to representatives of the different foreign governments represented by the flags. Similar displays of flown flags and lunar samples were made after the final flight, that of Apollo 17. As with the Apollo 11 displays, each state or country flag would have been presented to a state or territorial governor, to a national head of state, or to another official representative of each government. As far as my research has shown, the only flights for which plaques with flags and lunar samples were prepared were Apollo 11 and Apollo 17. Other small flags that were flown in the official flight kits on Apollo missions were usually mounted on presentation certificates, such as those shown here before they were presented to the recipients. Today, you are all gathered in the museum to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Apollo 16. This mission has significance for your country because it carried Latvia into space for the very first time. Let me tell you what we know about this flag and up on Apollo 16. As you probably know, the United States and other Western nations did not recognize the Soviet annexation of the Baltic nations. During the occupation, the Latvian people were represented by the Latvian Diplomatic Service in Exile. To emphasize the Western refusal to recognize the Baltic states as part of the USSR, the United States State Department specifically asked NASA to fly the flags of free Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia in the flag kit for the Apollo 16 mission. Notice the bolded text on the slide, which comes from the letter from the State Department on the right-hand side. It says that the flags flown represented national states generally accepted as independent in the world community. This was also the first NASA flight that carried a Ukrainian flag, although it was the flag of the Ukrainian SSR. This is because it was flown because Ukraine was part of the United Nations, was a member of the United Nations at the time. The above images show the pages from the flag list sent by the US State Department to NASA, and they show where Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were listed. So basically they took a flag list from a previous flight and then added in additional flags that they wanted flown on this mission. Other countries represented on the list that were not United Nations members at the time included Andorra, the Republic of China or Taiwan, West Germany, South Korea, Liechtenstein, Monaco, Nauru, San Marino, Switzerland, Tonga, Vatican City, South Vietnam, and Western Samoa. It is also interesting to note that the flags of several international organizations were also flown on Apollo 16, including the United Nations, the Council of Europe, the Organization of African Unity, and the Organization of American States. They also included a flag of the Olympic Games because the Olympics were scheduled to occur later that summer. The description of the flags in the Apollo 16 press kit used similar language to the State Department memorandum, stating that the spacecraft carried the flags of other national states, which are generally accepted as independent in the world community. However, the press kit did not include a list of specific flags flown on the mission. One final piece of evidence, and I think just from listening to the conversation earlier, that maybe you've already heard a little bit about this last piece of evidence. So the final piece of evidence that we have about the 3 Baltic flags being flown is this letter at right that was written by a United States senator and is now in an Estonian archive in Australia. In the letter, the senator said that the 3 flags were implanted on the moon. Now, if you look at the page from the press kit on the left, however, it clearly says that the flags were returned to Earth. Consider that that was prepared by NASA and that was also prepared right before the flight. I tend to believe the story from NASA that the flags were returned to Earth. This was also the standard procedure for these small flags that were flown on every Apollo mission. So I believe, notice that members of the crew signed the letter and added the statement, "carried with pleasure." Typically, after the Apollo flights, the flown flags were mounted on certificates or displays, such as these examples from Apollo 16, before they were presented through various channels. We do not have a paper trail that tells us how the international flags were delivered, but it is most likely that NASA passed them on to the United States Department of State so that they could be delivered through diplomatic channels. So here's what we definitely know. Obviously, more research needs to be done to complete the story of the Latvian, Lithuanian, and Estonian flags that were taken to the moon. We do know that they were included on the flight, and we do know that they were the flags of independence that were used and recognized by Western powers as the flags of the 3 countries. The Apollo 16 press kit did specify that the flown flags were returned to Earth after the flight, so it is doubtful that they were left on the lunar surface. We do not know if the flags were carried in the command module or the lunar module. There were flag kits listed on the launch stowage lists for both vehicles, and we do not know which kit they were in. This means that we don't know if they were taken down to the lunar surface with the astronauts or if they remained in lunar orbit aboard the command module. We also do not know how the flags were mounted after the flights. We don't know who received the flags on behalf of the governments in exile. And unfortunately, we do not know where these flags are today. So I do have a few ideas where you could look for these flags. So here are a few of the clues that I think a historian could follow up on, and maybe someday we can find out more information about these flags. First, we already asked the Latvian embassy in Washington, D.C. if they had the flag, and they were unable to find it in the embassy. However, perhaps it is stored somewhere and has been forgotten, because as I understand it, the representatives of Latvia moved to a new embassy in Washington, D.C. sometime after independence or reacquisition of independence. So perhaps the flag on its certificate was packed up in a box and maybe hasn't been found, and people have forgotten about the flag. It's also possible that it could be at the permanent mission of the Republic of Latvia to the United Nations in New York City. When I did a little research on your diplomat, Anatols Denbergs, he represented your people for many, many years in Washington, D.C., both during the occupation and after reacquisition of independence. He was the first Latvian ambassador to the United States. So perhaps the flag was taken to New York to be displayed in the UN mission there. I sent an email to the mission and have not heard back from them. So that's something that I think somebody might want to follow up on. It's also quite possible that the flag ended up in the papers of Anatols Denbergs. I'm sure he kept records. And so it would be interesting to see if you could find the location of his papers. Where did his files end up after his death in 1993? I did find on the English Wikipedia article about him that he bequeathed his property to Fraternitas Latica, one of the oldest Latin student fraternities. So it might be worthwhile to contact this organization and see if maybe they ended up with the flag. I think it would also be interesting to investigate and see if the Lithuanian or Estonian flags from Apollo 16 can be found anywhere. So these are just some of the possibilities for more research and for follow-up to see if we can find out more about the flags. With another story of Apollo 11 mission, the astronauts carried a small disc that included goodwill messages from American politicians, NASA managers, and representatives of 73 countries around the world. This disc was left on the surface of the moon and remains there to this day. It was a small disc made of silicon, and it was about the same size as an American 50-cent piece or $50. On that little disc, each message was photographed and reduced in size by 200 times, so that on the disc it appears as a tiny dot smaller than the head of a pin. It was transported in an aluminum capsule, and the astronauts left this capsule on the lunar surface. And as the press kit from Apollo 11 said, the messages from foreign leaders congratulate the United States and its astronauts and also express hope for peace to all nations of the world. Some are handwritten, others typed, and many are in native language. So we do not know if the message in Latvian was handwritten, typed, or if it was in Latvian or in English. We do have an English translation, however, from the press kit, and it was written by your representative, Mr. Denbergs. So the Latvian mission in Washington, D.C. was invited to contribute that message for the disc. And the message said, "On behalf of the Latvian nation, I salute the first men on the moon and pray for their safe return. May their achievement contribute to world peace and restoration of freedom to all nations." Estonia was also listed on the disc, also represented on the disc. However, for some reason that we do not know, Lithuania does not have a message on the disc. It could be simply that they didn't get the message back to NASA in time to be prepared for the disc. We just simply do not know. I think it is also interesting to note that when looking through the list of countries and messages, there is no message from the government in Moscow. So the Soviet Union, perhaps out of national pride, as they were trying to get men to the moon as well, decided not to include a message on the disc. We simply, again, don't know why there is no Soviet message, but I suspect they were asked and simply refused to provide one. I hope that you have enjoyed this short presentation about the flags of the Apollo program. I wish we knew more about the flags of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia that flew to the moon in 1972. Unfortunately, the full stories of these flags are not known at this time, but I think it would be a great topic of research for somebody to follow up on. At this time, if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Platov. Please, any questions? Mm-hmm.
Hello. That was quite interesting to learn about those details on both the flags and messages. A question, has there been sent any flags or messages from nations on the automated spacecraft to Mars, for example?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know about Mars. I do know that on the Voyager spacecraft, there was, and I can cover both, there was a special phonograph record that was included that had sounds from Earth. And what I do remember about it is that it had recordings of people speaking a variety of languages. However, I don't know which languages were included. I've never actually researched the phonograph record. But I suspect if you Google that in any language, you're going to find more details about it. So I think that would be a good way to find out about that. Mostly for other unmanned spacecraft, robotic spacecraft that NASA has sent out, typically the only flags would be a flag that's actually painted or affixed in the form of a decal to the spacecraft. So if you look at the typical way in which NASA labels spacecraft is with the United States flag, often with the NASA, either the NASA badge, which is the blue disc with the little vector image coming off of it, or the NASA logo type, which is sort of it's in NASA speak, it's called the NASA worm. And it's basically just the letters NASA written in very creative writing. Launched by the United States had a flag decal or not. I simply don't have that information.
Thank you. So any other questions?
Any more questions,
Yep.
please?
I have to say good afternoon. I think it's afternoon or very early morning in California right now. My name is Anna. I am from the Embassy of Latvia in the United States, even though I'm physically in Latvia tonight. I have to say I was very overwhelmed by your presentation. It's so nice. Some of the information I found myself when I was researching, I just wanted to say that about Anatoly Dembek's. So I did look into him, and as you pointed out yourself, we did switch our embassies after we regained our independence, but that was in early 2000, and unfortunately the flag wasn't there, so you can amend that point.
Okay, good.
That's one point less to research, so it's not at the embassy. But
so it's not in a missing box somewhere.
No, it's not, unfortunately. I mean, that would have been such a highlight of tonight if I could open a box and say, hey, it's here, it's all great, but we're still looking for it. However, I did want to add...
When you get back to the United States, check with your mission in New York and see if
I will.
Maybe it's there.
I will, definitely. I took a note of that as well. I'll ask my colleagues. However, I did have a question for you about the fate of the flags from other countries. Has anybody else reached out? Is this something that people are interested in? Or even if you even take a look at the United States flags that were flown, what happened to them, which weren't given as gifts to senators or governors or something like that. What about stories of those flags, if you can just tell us a little bit? Thank you.
Okay. So the ones that you're most likely to be able to find somewhere in a museum or on display in different countries are the flags from Apollo 11 and Apollo 17, because those were placed on those plaques with the lunar samples. So many of those have ended up in museums around the world. I have seen numerous photographs of different international flags on those plaques. If you look in at least the English Wikipedia article under, I think they're called Apollo 11 Lunar Sample Display and Apollo 17 Lunar Sample Display, somebody has accumulated a list of where the known specimens are right now that we know of. Not every country is accounted for there. So here's how this may have worked. Sometimes they may have been sent to museums. Sometimes they may have been sent to other cultural institutions like universities or libraries or archives. I'm aware if it was a library or an archive, it very possibly could just be in a storage area somewhere and people don't know that they even have them at this point. The flags on certificates are much more difficult to track because, again, since there's no piece of the moon attached to them, for example, for the international flags to diplomats, it's difficult to know if the person receiving the flag interpreted it as a personal gift to them or as a gift to their people on behalf of the United States. So it's very possible that many of these flags transferred into private hands through somebody who either, they may have misinterpreted the way the gift was being given, or they may have simply decided it was going to be their flag and it transferred into personal ownership. And the NASA did not specify what people were to do with these flags when they handed out. They simply handed the flag over as the gift from the people of America, and what happened to it after then wasn't really tracked by NASA after that point. Now, there's one other thing that you might find interesting. If you remember when I was talking about the little packets that they packed the flags in, the little bags, so it is actually impossible to know how many flags, how many of these small flags, and which flags flew on all of the Apollo missions. This is because of those personal preference kits that the astronauts had. So we know it had to fit in the little packet, and it had to be under a certain weight. After that, though, the only regulation that covered those materials was that the astronauts couldn't use them for profit. They had to bring them back and, present them later as gifts. So they weren't supposed to be like bringing them back and auctioning them off. They were usually supposed to be for friends or for family members, or if they went to visit, let's say an astronaut went to visit a state, they might have taken one of the flown flags from their flight attached to a certificate with them to present when they were in that state or in another country. However, the contents of the personal preference kits are private. So unless an astronaut decides to reveal and make public what they carried in their kit, we do not know, and NASA will not say. And to this date, none of the Apollo astronauts have ever released the contents list of their personal preference kit. Likewise, shuttle astronauts and astronauts who go to the International Space Station typically do not do that either, because they don't want to establish a precedent where people would expect for the contents of those personal preference kits to be made public. You do find some flags from the personal preference kits now. Once in a while, I see them up for auction, and the ones from Apollo are usually very expensive, far beyond my ability to purchase one. I have one from Apollo 9, which was a flight that did not go to the moon. And it had been carried in a personal preference kit. And so it came with a little certificate of authenticity that the astronaut had signed, saying, otherwise you're going to actually be able to for every flag that was flown to the moon, simply because of the personal preference kit, official flight kit difference. So that's probably more than you wanted, but hopefully that answered the question.
Interesting. Thank
Sure.
you.
Yeah, I did not find any evidence that the flags of the Baltic states flew on Apollo 17. I have been through the historical record, the history office that used to be at the NASA Johnson Space Center is now at a university. Mm-hmm. But I have looked through everything in their files relative to the flags. I've also looked through everything in the files at NASA headquarters in their history office relative to the flags. So part of the problem was when you're going to the moon and you're an engineer or a project manager, the important things to document are the engineering drawings for the spacecraft, that sort of, and the flight plans and that sort of thing. The little memos that talk about what flags are flying on which missions really weren't often considered to be that important by the NASA managers. And so a lot of that just simply never made it into the archives. I do not think that the Baltic flags flew again on Apollo 17, but I have no evidence. That's just my gut feeling, because I think if they had, they probably would have publicized it again as they did on Apollo 16. So my suspicion is that that was the only flight from Apollo in which those 3 flags were included.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so I agree about this Apollo 17. I haven't found anything about that too, so.
Yeah. Are there any other questions?
Okay, well, if no questions here, thank you, Dr. Platov, again for very nice speech, and we got to know very nice. Oops, sorry. We got to know very interesting new facts. Sorry about technical problem. Yes, so.
Yes, I'm sorry about the technical problems.
So, and yes, we will keep in touch and about these discoveries in the future, I believe. Thank you very much for all your hard work and interest in this problem. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much to everyone for your attendance and for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I wish you a wonderful evening in Latvia, and it's still morning in California. So I'm off to do whatever I do on a Saturday afternoon. So have a wonderful event. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, goodbye.
Tālāk aicināsim Raiti Misu pastāstīt mums par Mēnesi un Marsa iekarošanas nākotni un tagadni. Lūdzu.
Tā, tagad dzirdējām. Jā. Labdien! Tātad šodien pastāstīšu, kā jau pieteikts, par Mēnesis iekarošanas nākotnes plāniem, bet mazliet iesākumā par to, kas ir noticis iepriekš, tā lai vienkārši sakārtot domas un, ja kāds atkārtosim tās lietas, lai būtu interesantāk klausīties par nākotnes jautājumiem. Un tātad pirmais ir, tātad, manuprāt, svarīgākos datus par Mēnesi un Marsu esmu apkopojis, un lai saprastu to, ka šie abi debesu ķermeņi ir savā ziņā diezgan līdzīgi. Tātad gravitācija ir līdzīga, uz Marsu tā ir tikai nedaudz vairāk kā 2 reizes lielākā uz Mēnesi. Arī temperatūra uz virsmas ir līdzīga. Līdz ar to, teiksim, ja mēs kaut kādu tehnikas vienību vai kādu procesu gribam pārbaudīt, tad to var droši darīt uz Mēnesi. Tas faktiski būs ļoti līdzīgos apstākļos kā uz Marsa. Protams, ir arī atšķirības. Mēnesis ir tuvu, tikai dažu dienu lidojumu attālumā, savukārt uz Marsa jālido ir vairākus mēnešus. Un tas ir vēl viens iemesls, kāpēc visu vajag kārtīgi izmēģināt uz Mēnesi un tikai tad doties uz Marsu. Un tad mazliet par vēsturi, tātad ilgi nekavēsimies, bet tomēr tāds īsts apkopojums par to, tātad par šīm Apollo misijām. Cilvēki tātad tur ir bijuši, kā jau iepriekš arī tika teikts, 12 gabali tikai no tiem, turklāt tikai viens ir bijis profesionāls ģeologs, kas ir, manuprāt, Mēnesis gadījumā interesantākā specialitāte, jo tieši šī dažādas ģeoloģiskas lietas ir tās, ko tur var vislabāk pētīt. Un interesanti, ka bija, kā es to nosaucu pēc Apollo, un nedaudz vēl dažus gadus tur kaut kādas bezpilota misijas uz Mēnesi notika, un tad iestājās tāda tā kā lielā pauze, kad gandrīz 14 gadus neviens vispār par Mēnesi ziņas nelikās, netika sūtītas, kur pilotējumas pat bezpilota misijas, nekādas zondes, nekāda izpētes aparāti vienkārši netika sūtīti. Tā vienkārši interesanti, ka šis ir reāls kadrs no Apollo 17 brīža, kad viņi startē no Mēnesis, un faktiski tas ir tas moments, kad cilvēki pamet Mēnesi uz ļoti ilgu laiku, un kā mēs zinām, vēl tagad neviens tur nav bijis, kopš tā laika. Un iemesls tam bija faktiski tas, ka 80. gados notika tāda kā pārmaiņa, fokus novirzījās uz Space Shuttle, uz šo sistēmu. Tā bija, kā mēs zinām, ļoti dārga un grūti uzturāma sistēma, kaut arī sākumā tā nebija domāts. Bija domāts, ka būs kaut kādi, ja pareizi atceros, vairāk kā 30 starti gadā, kas neīstenojās, un līdz ar to nebija tik veiksmīga šī shuttle programma kā tāda, bet tai pašā laikā, protams, viņi ir devusi arī daudz ko tādu, kas bez shuttle būtu daudz sarežģītāk. Un faktiski tātad Space Shuttle tika konstruēts kā pavadoņu palaišanas platforma, un mērķis bija tāds, ka viņi varēja pavadoņus palaist orbītā, viņus varēja veikt šiem pavadoņiem apkopi, ja kaut kas saplīst, saremontēt, un, protams, kā visi zina, populārākais ir Hubble kosmiskais teleskops, kurš, ja nebūtu Space Shuttle, jau sen būtu beidzis savu aktīvo darbību. Lūk, un, protams, arī starptautiskās kosmiskās stacijas būvēšanā Shuttle ir liels pienesums, bet trūkums, protams, ir tāds, ka šī sistēma principā nebija spējīga lidot tālāk par zemi orbitu, kaut kādu līdz 600 km laikam bija tas viņas praktiskais darbības tālums augstāk, ar viņu īpaši aizlidot nevarēja augstākā orbītā. Kāpēc vēl ar vienu nelidojumu uz Mēnesi? Un tur jau tie iemesli, protams, ir pavisam vienkārši. Nav vairs šīs, kāpēc vispār tika aizlidots, bija šī space race, šī sacīkste. Par to, kurš pirmais nogādās, tātad vai PSRS vai ASV būs pirmā valsts, kas šo mērķi sasniegs un nosūtīs cilvēku uz Mēnesi. Un, kā teica prezidents Kenedijs, arī atgriezīs atpakaļ, kas ir tikpat svarīgi kā aizlidot turp. Un Apollo misijas, kā var teikt, ziedu laikos, tām darbībām tika atvēlēta apmēram 4% no ASV federālā budžeta, un tas ir ļoti liels finansējums, kāds šobrīd, kad viss NASA finansējums ir apmēram tikai 0,5%. Paši saprotiet, tas nav tās lietas salīdzināmas. Protams, var teikt, tehnoloģijas ir attīstījušās, lietas ir kļuvušas lētākas, bet par to 0,5% NASA jau ir jādara arī vēl daudzas citas lietas. Un tās citas lietas arī nav mazāk interesantas, kaut vai tas pats Perseverance un visi šie visurgājēji, kas darbojās un vāc datus. Un līdz ar to. Un tas vēl varētu komentēt par to, ka šīs sacensības starp ASV un Ķīnu, viņa, protams, var teikt, ka ir, bet viņi ir nosacīti, jo par to arī tālāk būs, ka faktiski jau tāda nopietni plāni ar datumiem ir tikai šobrīd ASV. Un tad kāpēc vispirms uz Mēnesi, par to jau es sākumā mazliet pieskāros, un tur ir vairāk iemesli. Pirmais, protams, ir tāds, ka Mēnesis ir ar nepieciešamiem resursiem bagāts. Konkrēti tur ir ūdens, skābeklis, ir ūdens, no kura ražot skābekli un ūdeņradi, kas savukārt ir izmantojami kā raķešu degviela. Līdz ar to, piemēram, ja plānotu misiju uz Marsu, tad kaut vai degviela raķetē, ar kuru lidos, nebūtu jāved no Zemes, kas ir dārgi, tāpēc, ka no Zemes pacelt augšā orbītā, jebko ir dārgi, jo Zemē ir diezgan stipra gravitācija, kā kāds raķešu būvētājs izteicies, ka Zemes gravitācija ir tik stipra, ka tā ir tā robeža, ka ja viņa būtu nedaudz stiprāka pilotējumi un arī bezpilota lidojumi būtu gandrīz vai neiespējami. Līdz ar to ir tā, ka kā atcerties, Mēnesim ir 0,16 G, pret Zemes 1 G šis gravitācijas spēks, un no Mēnesi ir daudz vieglāk pacelties, līdz ar to arī šos nepieciešamos resursus var vieglāk savest tajā raķetei, kas tālāk lidos uz Marsu. Un ir arī tāda plāna tiešām arī ir, tiks Mēnesis orbītā izveidots Lunar Gateway, kas būs, Latvijas tātad Mēnesis vārtēji, tā to varētu tulkot. Tā būs vieta, kas būs līdzīga kosmosa stacijai Zemes orbītā, tikai viņi būs mazāk izmēros, bet princips būs līdzīgs. Tur dzīvos astronauti, būs arī izvietotas tiešām degvielas mutes cisternas, kur varēs veikt minēto tātad uzpildi. Un principā tas būs atbalsta punkts gan misijām no Mēnesi orbītas uz Mēnesi, gan vēlāk nākotnē arī no Mēnesi orbītas uz Marsu. Protams, Mēnesis kā tāds ir interesants arī tīri ekonomiski, pasaules ekonomikai, jo tur ir daudz derīgu izrakteņu un nākotnē arī potenciāli kodolsintēzes degviela Hēlijs 3, kas ir tagad pēdējā laikā, kas interesēs, jau ir ievērojuši, ka kodolsintēzes kā tēma ir kļūst vien aktuālāk, tur ar vien jaunu sasniegumu notiek, un gan jau mēs nonāksim arī pie tā, ka šis Hēlijs 3 kļūst par resursu, kam būs noiets enerģētikā. Tālāk par programmu, kas saucās Artemis, tātad Artemīda. Interesanti, ka NASA cilvēkiem nebija īpaši ilgi jādomā, kā šo misiju nosaukt, jo Artemīda ir Apollona dviņu māsa, un tas simbolizē no vienas puses to pēctecību, no otras puses tas simbolizē to, ka Artemīdas programmas ietvaros ir plānots uz Mēnesi nogādāt pirmo sievieti, un arī pirmo cilvēku, kas ir cilvēks krāsains, jā, nu tā viņi saka, person of color, laikam tas ir pareizais vārdu salikums. Un tāpēc tā Artemīda arī tā simboliski to nodod to domu, ka tagad būs savādāk. Un šeit ir arī uzskaitīts tās, tie, kā es teicu, tas ir vienīgie, nu, tādi noteiktie, vairāk vai mazāk noteiktie datumi, kas ir saistīti ar mēnesi pilotējams apgūs nākotni. Un tātad jau šogad, ja viss ies tā kā vajag, tad tieši tā raķeta, ko jūs redzat attēlā, dosies bezpilota izmēģinājuma lidojumā un ieies Mēnesis orbītā, tur kādas dienas pavadīs, notestēs sistēmas, tur augšā tas baltais ir pilnā komplektācijā esošs Oriona kosmosa kuģis ar to servisu modulu, kas nodrošina darbību un piedziņu. Tālāk, pēc pāris gadiem, ja šis izmēģinājums izdosies veiksmīgi, jau būs pirmais orbitālais pilotējamais izmēģinājuma lidojums Mēnesis orbītā, bet nosēšanās vēl tad nav plānota. Un pirmā reize, kad tiks nosēšanās, ir plānota nosēšanās uz Mēnesis virsmas, atkal tātad faktiski atgriešanās, tas ir ap 25. gadu. Un par cik tas Lunar Gateway, šī vārteja tiek veidota, nu, tā paralēli neatkarīgi mazliet no Space Launch sistēmas, tad nav zināms, vai tā vārteja jau tur būs izveidota vai ne, un tādēļ šī 25. gada misija tiek veidota tā, ka viņa var notikt gan ar vārtejas starpniecību, gan bez tās. Savukārt uz 28. gadu ir plānots, ka tā vārteja, kurā gadījumā kaut kādā veidā jau tur būs, jo kopā ar cilvēkiem, kas būs tas pilotējums lidojums, tad tur lidos cilvēki, tur arī tiks nogādātas jau daļas no šīs pašas vārtejas. Tā pašā raķetē būs iekšā moduls, tātad EEST, tas ir apdzīvojamais modulis, kur kas nodrošinās iespēju ilgāk dzīvot tajā vārtejā, nekā to nodrošinās tā aparatūra, kas tur jau būs iepriekš. Nu, un tad 27. gadā ir nākamais lidojums, kurš atkal nogādās nākamo šī Lunar Gateway sastāvdaļu, un arī, protams, tur ir plānotas nolaišanās uz virsmas. Un tālāk jau aptuveni reizi gadā ir plānota pilotējuma misija uz Mēnesi. Tātad, kas tad ir tas kosmosa kuģis, ar kuru lidos, tātad atcerieties, tur raķetē augšā tas baltais ir tas Oriona kosmosa kuģis, tad, kad viņš ir orbītā, viņš izskatās šādi. Un interesanti, ka viņš ir paredzēts, lai nogādātu apkalpi Mēnesis orbītā, bet ne uz virsmas. Vēl viena interesanta detaļa tāda, ka to servisu modulu, tātad to, kam tie saules baterijas spārni klāt un dzinēji, viņš turklāt arī vēl nodrošina gaisa elpošanai visu vidi tajā Oriona kapsulā. Tātad to ir izstrādājusi Eiropas kosmosa aģentūra. Nu, un, protams, nesēja raķeta ir SLS, tātad tā, kas bija iepriekšējā attēlā. Šo nogādās orbītā. Mazliet par to Mēnesi vārteju vēl. Tātad tas ir, kā es teicu, tā kā paralēlais projekts, kas ir NASA's, Eiropas kosmosa, Japānas kosmosa un Kanādas kosmosa aģentūra kopīgs projekts. Te ir arī provizoriskie plāni par to vārtejas attīstību. Tātad 24. gadā plānots, ka Mēnesis orbītā nogādās pirmo šīs vārtejas modulu, kas būs tā kā energoapgādes un arī apdzīvojamības ziņā jau būs kādas iespējas, bet tas nebūs liela tā telpa, kur dzīvot. Un tad, kā jau minēju, tas EEST, tas būs tas moduls, kas lidos kopā ar vienu no pilotējumām misijām, un tas palielinās šo apdzīvojamo telpu līdz 125 kubikmetriem, un tas jau būs ievērojams dzīvojamais, kā saka, tilpums, kur varēs arī cilvēku līdz pusgadam uzturēties. Autonomi. Un tālāk, protams, arī pārējie moduļi, kas jau nodrošinās vēl citas lietas. Tālāk NASA ir noslēgusi līgumu ar SpaceX par īpašu Spaceship HLS izstrādi, kas ir īpaši pielāgots Starship, kas ir paredzēts, lai nolaistos no Mēneses orbītas uz Mēneses virsmu. Un te ir tā atbilde par to, kā tā nolaišanās notiks. Tātad cilvēki ar AN to iepriekš rādīto kapsulu nonāks Mēneses orbītā, pārsēdīsies šajā Starship HLS un ar to jau tad nolaidīsies uz Mēneses virsmas un tur varēs kādu laiku darboties, veikt eksperimentus un pat cik tas ir pavisam kaut kas cits salīdzinājumā ar to, kā tas bija Apollo laikos, tad labums tāds, kad varēs nolaisties jebkur uz Mēnesi. Kā zināms, tad Apollo bija ierobežots ar ekvatoriālo daļu, tikai šīs nolaišanās iespējas varēs nolaisties. Piemēram, polos, kur ir ļoti interesantas lietas, tas pats minētais ūdens visdrīzāk tieši polos ir vislielākajā koncentrācijā. Protams, tur astronauti un kas no viņu visi būs kosmonauti pēc nosaukuma, bet tie, kas tur aizlidos cilvēki, tur varēs uzturēties daudz ilgāk nekā Apollo misijas ietvaros. Un principā tā ideja ir tāda, ka ņemot vērā to, kad astronauti uzturās tajā vārtajā, kas ir Mēneses orbītā, ka faktiski šīs misijas vairs, kā saka, nebūs karogu un tādu īsu eksperimentu misijas, bet tās būs tādas misijas, kad cilvēki ieradīsies uz Mēnesi un cilvēku klātbūtne vairāk vai mazāk tur būs nepārtraukt vai no orbītā vai uz virsmas. Jā. Loma šajā Artemīdas projektā ir atvēlēta arī Falcon Heavy raķetē, kas, protams, arī ir SpaceX raķete. Un tā būs tā, kas nodrošinās to pirmo moduļu nogādāšanu Mēneses orbītā, konkrēti šos te tātad energoapgādes un loģistikas moduli. Tas pirmais PPI tātad un Halo modulis, tas, kas būs iespēja jau kaut kādu neilgu laiku līdz 30 dienām dzīvot 2 astronautiem. Tie pirmie tiks nogādāti autonomi, un tur nebūs nepieciešama montāža ar cilvēku starpniecību. Tas paredzēts, ka viņi saslēgsies un izveidos šo Mēneses vārtejas bāzi, tas notiks autonomā režīmā. Un otra lieta, kam Falcon Heavy tiks izmantot, ir apgādes kuģa Dragon XL nogādāšana Mēneses tātad orbītā, kas pēc tam, protams, viņš arī pieslēgsies šajā Mēneses vārtējai. Un Dragon XL ir īpaši ar to, ka viņa tehniskajās prasībās ir noteikts, ka šim kosmosa kuģim ir jāspēj aizvest vismaz 5 tonnas kravas un jāspēj pašam sevi nodrošināt ar enerģiju pie tās Mēneses vārtejas, jāspēj būt vismaz gadu pievienotam. Un pēc tam, kad atvienojas, jāspēj ir pašam, kā saka, sevi likvidēt ar domu, ka tur var tad salikt iekšā kaut kādas nevajadzīgas lietas un atkritums, jebko. Un tad tas tiek viss, kur viņš paliks īsti nezinu, gan jau, kad vai uz Mēnesi nokritīs, vai arī to viņi izdomās, kur likt. Bet katrā ziņā ideja tāda, ka viņam jāspēj ir pašam tur tikt ar sev galā pēc tam. Un ir vēl viens tāds projekts, kur būs iesaistīta arī Eiropas kosmosa aģentūras jaunā Ariane 6 raķete, kas top līdzīgi kā Starship. Arī šī raķete vēl nav gatava, bet viņas detaļas praktiski laikam jau ir saražotas un pirmo drīz montēs. Un tas ir tāds Hercules modulis, kas arī būs daļa no šīs vārtejas. Viņas bāzes vieta, šī moduļa bāzes vieta būs tieši šī Mēneses vārteja, šis Lunar Gateway, bet tas būs tāds tehniski spējīgs risinājums, kas spēs nolaisties uz Mēneses virsmas. Viņu varēs izmantot kā transportu, ar viņu palīdzību varēs vākt iežu paraugus un arī veikt tādus ģeoloģiskos pētījumus, bet, protams, ka tur par to vien droši vien varētu stāstīt vēl daudz, bet principā tas ir, teiksim, šeit tikai tiek pieminēts. Ja. Pēc citām valstīm tātad vēl kaut kādi ievērības cienīgi plāni ir Ķīnas kosmosa aģentūrai, vai kā to organizāciju sauc, vienot sakot ķīniešiem. Viņi ir izstrādājuši tātad palielināts ietilpības tādu nākamās paudzes kosmosa kuģi, kas to Šanžu aizstās. Un tas kosmosa kuģis ir mērķtiecīgi izstrādāts ar domu, ka ar viņu var lidot arī uz Mēnesi. Protams, ir runa par Mēnesi orbītu šajā gadījumā, bet viņš ir veidots tieši ar domu, kad kā viņus tur ķīnieši sauc, bet ķīnieši tātad kosmonauti vai kā varēs tātad ar šo lidot uz Mēnesi un nonākt Mēnesis orbītā. Bet jāsaka, ka tie plāni viņiem, tādi konkrēti plāni īpaši nav, vienkārši ir ieplānots, ka kaut kad ap 25. 28. gadu būs pirmie pilotējumie lidojumi, kas visdrīzāk, protams, būs Zemes orbītā, nevis uzreiz uz Mēnesi viņi lidos, par to ir ļoti jāšaubās. Un tad ir arī tādas privātas iniciatīvas, gan jau ir dzirdēts par šī Japāņu miljardieru, kuru vārdu izlasēt. Es nemēģināšu viņu izrunāt pareizi. Viņš ir finansējis tātad vienas Starship lidojuma izmaksas. Tā misija saucās DMU un tajā dosies, principā, pilnībā civila apkalpe, kas sastāvēs no šī miljardiera izvēlētiem cilvēkiem. Ja es pareizi atceros, tie cilvēki jau ir, vismaz lielākā daļa jau ir izvēlēti, ir zināmi. Un tur viņu starpā lielākoties ir mākslinieki un radoši profesiju cilvēki. Un mērķis ir to misijas, tas lielais mērķis, kā pats tas Japāņu miljardieris ir teicis, radīt iedvesmu cilvēkiem, kas sekos tajā misijā un pēc tam arī uzklausīs tos lidojuma dalībniekus un viņa domas un iespaidus, kad viņi ar tiem dalīsies. Protams, ir arī citas bezpilota aktivitātes. Interesantākās, manuprāt, no tām ir, faktiski konkrēts te saraksts nav, tas ir, protams, cita tēma, bet interesanta lieta, kas ir plānos, ir, ka vai varētu uz Mēnesi darboties, tur, protams, arī jāspēj navigēt, un Eiropas kosmosa aģentūra ir plāns Mēnesi orbītā ievadīt tādu tā kā satelītu mākoni, līdzīgi kā Galileo, GPS un Baidu un Glanos sistēmas, kad no vairākiem pavadoņiem, izmantojot triangulāciju, tu var noteikt savas koordinātas uz šeit uz Mēnesis virsmas, un pat cik, kā zināms, Mēnesim ir tā īpatnība, ka viena Mēnesis puse nekad no Zemes īsti nav redzama. Mēs zinām, ka mēs no Zemes varam redzēt līdz 59% Mēnesis virsmas, bet visu mēs nevaram, un ir daļa Mēnesis, kur, piemēram, radio saziņa nav iespējama. Un, lai to īstenot, tad ir nepieciešams retranslācijas pavadoņu tīkls, un tad šie navigācijas pavadoņi pie viena kalpot arī kā sakaru nodrošināšanai ar to Mēnesi otru pusi. Un tas būtu tāds infrastruktūras elements, kas būtu izmantojams visiem un nodrošinātu labāku dzīvošanu uz Mēnesi tajā brīdī, kad tur tā dzīvošana būs. Runājot par Marsu, konkrētu datumu un konkrētu plānu nav, tāpēc par tiem es arī šeit tā ļoti nestāstu. Bet ir skaidri zināms, ka ātrāk par 2030. gadu pilnīgi noteikti nekādi starti Marsa virzienā nebūs, jo mēs pat uz Mēnesi neesam atgriezušies kaut vai tāpēc, bet ne jau tāpēc vien. Tas ir tehnoloģiski daudz lielāks izaicinājums nekā aizlidot uz Mēnesi un pēc tam uz viņu atgriezties. Tas ir cita mēroga, uzdevums, un faktiski tagad jāpagaida, kad kaut kādas dzīvošanas tehnoloģijas uz Mēnesis virsmas tiks izmēģinātas, tur dzīvojamie moduļi, nezinu, viss, kas vēl nepieciešams, lai dzīvotu ārpus Zemes uz citu debesu ķermeņa virsmas. Tas viss uz Mēnesi jāizmēģina, un līdz ar to arī tam ir nepieciešams laiks. Un tāpēc arī šādi prognozi var droši izteikt, ka tas notiks noteikti pēc 30. gada, gan jau vēl vēlāk. Bet te pašā laikā notiek arī kaut kādas lietas, ko jau praktiski pamēģina. Un viena no tām ir tātad Perseverance visurgājējā bija tāds moksī modulītis neliels, kurš viņam pievada elektrību, un viņš no Marsa atmosfēras, kas pārsvarā sastāv no ogleskābās gāzes, 96% vai 7%, spēja ražot skābekli. Tātad pievadam enerģiju, viņš ražo skābekli. Un tāds eksperiments ir veikts, tas strādā, to var izdarīt. Un līdz ar to viena no tādām lietām, ko jebkurā gadījumā kādreiz būtu bijis jāpamēģina, jau ir pamēģināt, un ir zināms, ka tas ir iespējams. Un, protams, otra interesanta lieta, kas arī šajā pašā Perseverance misijā ir pirmo reizi, tātad gan jau ir dzirdēts, ka ir noticis pirmais lidojums cita debesu ķermeņa atmosfērā, tātad Ingenuity, šis helikopters ir lidojis Marsa atmosfērā. Un interesanti, ka viņam no sākuma tā bija tā kā demonstrācijas misija, viņš palidoja, parādīja, ka var lidot, bet viņš ir izrādījies daudz labāks lidotājs un daudz izturīgāks nekā bija sākotnēji plānots, un tagad viņš ir kļuvis faktiski par skautu šim roverim, šiem izsurgājējiem. Viņš spēja, tātad, protams, loģiski lidot var tālāk un vieglāk nekā aizbraukt. Un tad viņš veic tādu kā skautu izlūkošanas lidojums, apskatās apkārt visurgājiem, varbūt kādu labāku ceļu izvēlēties vai kādu citu, vai iegūt kādu attēlu vietai, līdz kurai neaizbrauks, tāpēc, ka liels līkums. Līdz ar to viņš faktiski jau piedalās šajā te Perseverance misijā kā pilntiesīgs komandas loceklis. Tā, paldies par uzmanību, un tad vai jums ir kādi jautājumi par šo un arī droši vien jebkuru citu tēmu, kuras varētu mēģināt atbildēt.
Paldies, Raiti. Lūdzu, jautājumus. Ja drīkst, es pajautāšu. Jā, tu sacīja, ka tātad līdz 30. gadam uz Marsu pilotējiem lidojumu nebūs, bet kāds tomēr būtu tas tavs labākais solījums?
Zinu, kā šeit solīt ir bīstami, tāpēc, ka tu nosolīsi nepareizi, bet es domāju, ka tas varētu būt kāds 40. gads reāli. Protams, mēs nevaram precīzi zināt, kā ies Ilonam Maskam ar viņu Starship. Bet pat, ja viņš viņu uztaisīs un viņam ir pirmkārt saistības pret NASA, kā mēs tikko uzzinājām, viņam būs jānodrošina nolaišanās, un tas paņems resursus, līdz ar to, kaut kādā brīdī, protams, nonāks arī līdz tam, ka viņi aizsūtīs kādu Starship uz Marsu, bet tas noteikti nebūs pilotējums. Viņi uz turien sūtīs, es domāju, kādus, 20 gabalus bezpilota režīmā, pārliecināsies, ka var aizlidot, padzīvoties, tur, kaut ko saražot, ko vajag, nodrošināt to vidi, aplidot apakai. Un tad, kad tas būs noticis bezpilota režīmā, tad viņi sūtīs cilvēku. Tas ir tas, kā es to redzu, bet viņiem, protams, var būt citi plāni. Es darītu tā. Es cilvēkus uzreiz uz dūlo nesūtītu.
Jā, paldies.
Bija kaut kāds Jā, bija kādreiz tāds joks, ka vienmēr ir 30 gadu attālumā mēs esam no tā, ka cilvēks...
Tas ir gan par kodola sintēzi, gan par Marsu.
Tagad varbūt ir 20 gadi, bet visu laiku tie gadi bīdās uz priekšu.
Zini kā, ir jau tā, ka ir bišķi sakustējies, nav vairs tas, tā dziļā bezcerība, kas bija, teiksim, 80. 90. Tad jau bija skaidrs, nebūs. Nav ar ko pirmkārt aizlidot un arī nav paredzēts, ka tuvākajā laikā būs. Tagad jau tas ir mainījies. Tagad jau tomēr top raķetes, kas visdrīzāk varēs arī līdz Marsam aizlidot. Līdz ar to tas tādā ziņā ir labāk.
Jā, labi, paldies, Raiti, par interesantu stāstījumu un ieskatu nākotnē. Un sagatavosimies vēl nobeigumā. Es tūlīt pēc brīža jums sniegšu nelielu kopsavilkumu par šodien notiekošo. Jā. notiek 21. aprīlī nosēšanās uz mēnesi virsmas, tiek veikti visi darbi, sekmīgi atkal nodarbināts lunamobīlis, braucamā automašīna uz mēnesi, kas jau Apollo 15 tika izmēģināta. 24. aprīlī notiek pacelšanās no Mēnesi virsmas, tātad starts, bet ievērojiet, ka tas notiek 24. aprīlī 1:25 pēc pasaules laika. Amerikas kontinentā joprojām tad vēl ir 23. aprīlis. Tāpēc, ja mēs skatāmies, piemēram, uz izdotajām aploksnēm, tad mēs redzam, ka starts no Mēnesi virsmas, protams, pirmās dienas aploksne ir tieši 23. aprīlī, tātad datumā, kā tieši pirms 50 gadiem, kā mēs esam šeit pulcējušies. Tālāk šis nosēšanās aparāts sekmīgi atkal sasniedz komandu moduli, kas visu to laiku turpināja riņķot ap Mēnesi. Tas ir 25. aprīlī notiek savienošanās. Un, es atvainojos, savienošanās notiek ātrāk, bet 25. aprīlī uzsāk šis sistēma ceļu atpakaļ no Mēnesi orbītes uz Zemi. Un piezemēšanās notiek 27. aprīlī. Šeit mēs redzam Apollo 16 starta brīdi, tad Saturna 5 nesēja raķetes startu, kad šī misija tiek iesākas, respektīvi šeit uz borta atrodas arī visi mūsu Baltijas karogi. Šeit jau fotogrāfija, kur astronauti fotografējas komandieris Džons Jangs, Čārls Djūks un Kens Metinglīs fotografējas jau pēc sekmīgi veiktā uzdevuma uz Zemes, tātad pēc jau sekmīgās Apollo 16 misijas. Tātad, ko mēs zinām par Apollo 16 karogiem? Mēs zinām, ka tieši šajā Apollo 16 misijā tik tiešām bija 2 karogu bloki. Viens atradās, kā jau minēts iepriekš, Mēnesi modulī, otrs komandu modulī. Mēs, diemžēl, nezinām, kurā no šiem karogu blokiem atradās mūsu Baltijas valstu karogi. Katrā gadījumā nav izslēgta doma pat, ka šie karogi, ka informācija par šiem karogiem nemaz netika īpaši uzsvērta, tādējādi pamatojot, ka visi karogi ir vienlīdzīgi, tātad visi ir lidojuši uz Mēnesi no tiem izraudzītajiem. Jā, vēlreiz es vēlos uzsvērt, ka tie bija neliela izmēra karogi, 10x15 centimetru izmēros, bet kas visi tika dēvēti par goda pilnā vārdā par parogiem, nekādi neatšķiroties no liela izmēga karogiem simboliskā nozīmē. Jau tika minēts, ka starp dažādiem ANO valstu karogiem, kas bija primārais mērķis, kas lidoja uz Mēnesi, bija arī olimpiskais karogs un, protams, mūsu neatkarīgo Baltijas valstu karogi. Iemesls mēs atkal visi ļoti labi zinām, ka tas bija tāpēc, ka ASV neatzina Baltijas valstu aneksiju, līdz ar to mūsu karogi kā pilnvērtīgi pasaules valstu dalībnieki tika izraudzīti šajā un iekļauti šajā misijā. Vēlos vēlreiz uzsvērt, ka starp šiem karogiem bija arī Ukrainas un Baltkrievijas karogi, jo šīs republikas tajā laikā bija kā apvienoto nāciju atsevišķi biedri politiskā veidā. Tas patiesībā bija tāds kā Padomju Savienības mēģinājums iegūt lielāku politisko varu apvienotajās nācijās, jo Padomju Savienības mērķis bija, ka visas republikas kā pastāvīgi biedri piedalīsies apvienotajās nācijās. Līdz ar to Padomju Savienība iegūt viltīgā veidā ļoti daudz balsu, ļoti liela ietekme šajā organizācijā. Bet arī jau sākotnēji tā tika ierobežota līdz 3 biedriem no šī te padomju bloka. Un vēlāk tā tad zinām, ka tas vēl tika ierobežots uz 1 biedru. Tie Ukrainas un Baltkrievijas karogi, kā jau minējām, bija tā laika PSR karogi, bet šodien, protams, mēs godājam neatkarīgās Ukrainas karogu mūsu pasākumā. Vēlreiz atcerēsimies un padomāsim, ka šī informācija Padomju Savienībā tolaik bija ļoti slepena. Un šeit uz ekrāna jūs šobrīd redzat Rožkalna kunga pieminēto ļoti sliktā kvalitātē saglabājušos kopiju no kopijas tā laika pagrīdes izdevumam, kurā tātad šī informācija un kā tas izskatījās, kā bija publicēta. Tātad vienā mēs redzam šo oriģinālo anglisko versiju, kas ir šajā kopijā vairs nav, diemžēl, salasām, un blakus ir tulkojums, kas ir izlasāms. Tātad Rožkalns saņēma slepenā veidā, kā jūs jau dzirdējat iepriekš, šo te oriģinālu kopiju, ja, kas bija adresēta pārstāvim Ilmāram Plēram. Un tālāk ar LNK dalībnieču Zvaigznītes un Cārmas Ginteres palīdzību radās tas tulkojums. Un tātad LNK biļetenā numur 10, 13. lapaspusē tika veikta šī publikācija, kas šobrīd redzama ekrānā. Tad jāsaka, ka oriģinālu no šīs te oriģinālu kopiju no šīs angliskās oriģinālās vēstules, ko rakstīja senators Čārls Persijs, mums izdevās iegūt no igauņu diasporas Austrālijā. Viņi publicēja šo vēstuli internetā. Tātad, un šeit mēs redzam, jā, ka tā ir tik tiešām vizuāli salīdzinot, mēs redzam, ka atbilstība ir 1:1 ar to sākotnējo nesalasāmo tekstu un, protams, pilnīgi 100% atbilstība tulkojumam. Tātad mēs zinām, ka šī ir tā pati kopija, kuru saņēma arī savulaik Rožkalna kungs. Tātad mūsu karogi ir lidojuši uz Mēnesi. Vēlos teikt, ka tam ir ļoti liela vēsturiska un simboliski politiska nozīme. Tā laika cilvēkiem, protams, Baltijā. Kaut arī fakti bija noklusēti, mēs zinām, cik svarīgi bija dažādi notikumi, cik simboliski un brīvību veicinoši bija notikumi Latvijas pacelšana kādā karoga mastā vai kādā ēkā. Un šeit iet runa par karogu pacelšanu visaugstākajā pasaules līmenī, nu ne tikai pasaules, bet kosmosa līmenī. Vēlreiz atcerēsimies, ka arī Ukrainas karogs kā neatkarīgs ir lidojis uz Mēnesi, un tam īpaši liela nozīme ir šī brīža politiskajā kara situācijā. Tāpēc mūsu atbalsts Ukrainai, protams, ir nevis ar tā laika PSR karogu, bet ar neatkarīgās šī brīža Ukrainas karogu. Un nobeigumā aicinu tos, kas vēl nav apskatīt Meteorītu muzeju ekspozīciju, pievēršot īpašu nozīmi mūsu Mēnesi meteorītiem, arī īpašajai izstādē, kas ierobežotu laiku, ir veltīta tieši Apollo 16 dažādiem objektiem. Un kā ļoti īpašu sagadīšanās dēļ vēlos uzsvērt Agvas Zarkas meteorītu, kas nokrita tieši pirms 3 gadiem, 2019. gada 23. aprīlī Kostarikā. Bet kāpēc tieši vēlos šādā sakarā uzsvērt šajā 3 gadē šo meteorītu? Jo tas satur vairāk kā 7 miljārdus gadu vecus, pavisam sīkus iekļāvumus, kas ir atlidojuši mūsu Saules sistēmā no citām zvaigžņu pasaulēm. Tas ir ļoti unikāls meteorīts, un tas satur visvecāko matēriju, kāda jebkad laboratorijā ir pētīta uz Zemes, un to ir iespējams tagad apskatīt klātienē te pie mums Meteorītu muzejā. Protams, pievērsiet uzmanību un apskatiet arī citus meteorītus mūsu kolekcijā. Paldies, vēlos pateikties visiem klātesošajiem un, protams, arī visiem tiem, kas skatījās mūsu tiešraidi, un vēlos vēlreiz atvainoties par tehniskajām problēmām, kuras mēs konstatējam šīs pārraides laikā. Paldies jums!